Good morning, everybody. For chapter 12, we're looking at gender in the city. Um, and we've talked about, again, last chapter, how cities have been, how different ethnic groups and races have both been impacted by city structures and how they have impacted the structures of cities. And in this chapter, we look at the relationship between gender in the modern city environment. Again, the planning stages of these processes are really important to understand. And, when they first began to develop cities, American cities in particular, into their modern state in the earlier 20th century, it was a very different labor environment than we have now. And most significantly, most white women, and that preface is very important, most white women didn't work, because we'll talk about, that's not something that a luxury that a lot of other races had. But because of that, and keep in mind that the driving force behind these cities again was the Industrial Revolution that brought a lot of workers to these cities. And it was mainly going to be factory-based work that was going to be done by men. So the cities themselves were very much designed with this model in mind. These are male-dominated cities in terms of their design. And this is the rationale behind why they're organized. That again, that, for the most part, women might come into cities to consume, but not as much to produce labor. Let's look more deeply at the rationale behind these processes. Again, as quizzes and exams come up, and we're moving pretty steadily along. It's going to be April next week, young people. So we're almost to the finish line. As always, kind of get a sense of how information might be presented on the test or the next quiz. And this has all the makings of a short answer question that you might see there. But again, you're not going to do as well on that question just by trying to memorize these concepts. So really trying to understand it. And again, most of these things are pretty straightforward. The city, again, was very much a place that was not very inviting to women in the early 20th century, 1920s, 30s, 40s. This slide helps explain the reasons why that was the case. So it's believed initially that, again, it was immoral for women to work. They could potentially damage themselves physically if they were allowed to work. That if they were working, who would take care of the home? Who would take care of the kids? And then most significantly, that there was a natural that God created this division of labor between sexes. And the women's place was at home, the men's place was out in the world in the big dangerous city. And the cities were designed based upon these philosophies that, as we see today, are very well outdated. Many of these philosophies come from the Victorian era in Britain, they kind of help to define how womanhood was supposed to be expressed. It's even included etiquette manuals that kind of instructed women on the proper way to behave.
Dr. Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad.
Again, the laws even included at one time that women, grown women, would have curfews in urban environments. Again, this was viewed as a place that wasn't safe and not really civil for the wills of women. But again, the facts of these matters are always important to consider. And objectively speaking, women are much, statistically speaking, that women experience a lot more violence in their own homes or closer home than they do out in urban centers among strangers. That domestic abuse, for example, is a lot more common. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't be on your P's and Q's, but just sometimes the data doesn't support the exaggerated levels of fear at times. Again, if there's any questions or comments about any of this, don't hesitate to let me know.
Like for me, oh my fault. It's a comment, and it's not on the gay enclaves, but basically it's like on a like past the 2-3 slides that you just mentioned, like going back to like not even just only back then, but like today, not every country is like America. So I know some of those concepts and things that you have the bulletins by. I know some of that's still going on. You know, there are a lot of women who, you know, they can't do certain things and they're still restricted. So like, you know, to me, it was just kind of, it just made me think about like how like America and like some of these countries in North and South America, how they have like a little bit more freedom, and how like other countries, not necessarily in Europe, but more of that, you know, more as of like in Asia, like how the women there, they're still restricted and they're still limited to do certain things. So I was just trying to like pay attention to that.
No, absolutely. It's always good, as we walk through these things, it's always good to make these modern connections to things that you all have seen and observed directly. And we see this, for example, with gay enclaves. Anybody who spent even a little bit of time in Atlanta, Georgia, where you have a large
Facts.
African American gay community there.
Facts.
And as we talked about earlier, in a smaller town, some of those norms and mores will be a lot more difficult for you to just, express yourself, and you'll stick out more. In a place like Atlanta, where is so much going on, after a while, those kind of things like blend into the background. Doesn't mean that, like again, like I'm still often very shocked by some of the things that I see when I go to Atlanta, and I go there pretty frequently. And that's somebody again, like is growing up in Chicago, which also has a huge gay community. There's segments of town, like so. In Chicago, there's a neighborhood. I think the actual name of the neighborhood is Lakeview, but it's called fictionally Boys Town for exactly what it sounds like. And if you go in that neighborhood, for example, like you'll see like the rainbow flags and things like that on businesses, letting people know that, it's a gay friendly place. And again, people, when we talk about, the breakdowns of community, those things definitely do happen, but whether it be something like this, hip hop subculture, skateboarders, different religious minorities, you can find more of a community of those differences within a city environment that you can in more rural environments. In San Francisco, for example, in Greenwich Village in New York, are a couple of examples of this. And this is in Stonewall, New York. There was a riot in the 1960s. There was like a gay club or gay bar in New York. The police will come in there and harass people at times. And one day, the gay cats, like they got sick of that jumping off, and they snapped off, and they had a riot. So the Stonewall riots was commemorated in those statues there in New York. The discussion over sexuality, be it female sexuality in terms of are you a good, we talked about the Victorian models of womanhood. So a lot of times, like if you're a woman who likes sex, if you're a single woman and you were having sex out of wedlock, that would be, really frowned upon. Keep in mind, again, we talked about like if it's a girl like that in a small town, it's viewed very differently than like in a big city where, she might, be exploring her sexuality. But in New York, everybody, Sex in the City, in New York, but, the women, some of them, Samantha in particular, I think it was Samantha, yeah. She was getting, I know, so Sex in the City is probably way before y'all time. It is mainly like, a chick show, but it's pretty tight actually. If you had a girlfriend or a wife at that time, you were almost going to be sure to be something to watch in that stuff. But one of the characters here, she was like, getting it in all the time, getting her freak on. In New York City, like, not only is that not really looked down upon, her business, it would be a lot more difficult for her business to be in the streets. In a smaller town, that wouldn't be the case. The same, again, like we said, with homosexuals. So a lot of times, the family is held up in contrast to some of these behaviors. But it's also important that we understand that the way that we understand family traditionally is really changing. People are having a lot less kids. The divorce rate is rising a great deal. And not everybody wants to have the same type of living arrangements. There may be people where they may have like a life partner where, Deshaun, you and your girl may get together, you may pay bills and build a life together, but you may choose not to get married. Some people will get married and not actually have, deliberately not have children. So the family has oftentimes been idealized because it's really valuable to capitalism and keeping people spending money. So gay people are oftentimes scapegoated for the breakdown of family, hey, people aren't reproducing, and hey, we aren't, gonna, it erodes family values, and oh my God, what if we have kids being raised in gay families? There have been a lot of challenges with people being raised in heterosexual families. So heterosexual people, reproducing, and then fathers not seeing their children for 30, 40 years. Those are family values. So we want to be very mindful and careful about these kind of things. And we also have more and more urban, what the author describes as urban tribes formulating, where when we talk about family, a lot of times it's viewed as just like people that you have blood relations to. But in many urban centers, people kind of develop familiar type ties with people that, they have long-term friendships and other commitments with. So this is common, for example, amongst urban professionals in their late 20s and early 30s. So I'm familiar with it, but I never really got into the TV show Friends. But I'm sure you all are familiar enough with it where, you had all these grown people after college and stuff, living in a house together. So those kind of models of living has become more common, as opposed to the tradition where, okay, I'm out of college, I'm in my job, now I'm supposed to get married and start kids. There are many people that weren't looking to adopt that model. And it's easier to do that in a large city than it is in a smaller town. We also discuss again, like, so when we talk about, the things that pull people into cities, of course, is jobs first and foremost. We talked about, the freedom that comes with like being able to, um, if you're a punk rocker and you want to wear spiked hair, if you are homosexual, you want to be able to live your life without judgment or relatively free from judgment. No, again, best believe there's still many people who judge these behaviors in city environments. People just don't have as much time and space to be consumed with them. If you are in touch with your sexuality and you don't feel like you need to be married to explore that, if you come from a really religious family community and it doesn't necessarily like align with your personal belief system, city environments oftentimes are good pulls, towards people like that. But it's also no accident that urban environments produce a lot of creative people as well. So our artists, our musicians, our computer programmers. Throughout American history, a lot of that creativity has been driven in urban environments. When artists, when they want to make it big, they usually go somewhere to like a big city. When jazz first started, it was understood you had to go to Chicago and New York usually to really, be able to accelerate your career. It's not an accident that a creative culture like hip hop could probably only start in a place like New York City. And since it's developed, it's, have hotbeds, so like, Atlanta, New Orleans, Los Angeles. If you want to go into like, if you're an actor, you going to LA, out to Hollywood, or you going to New York to be on Broadway. And there are many people who want to engage in these arts and will take to these, cities as well. So they're not attracted to cities for, the downtowns that have the large sports stadiums. Again, it's the arts, the culture. So these are, where you have, again, artists, musicians, dancers, professors like myself, architects, a lot of tech people. Again, like it's not an accident that places like San Francisco and Seattle were the places where you had like, all, the technologies that drive our economy today, that people will flood to those places and they would kind of stimulate off of each other. There are more and more cities that measure their level of creativity index, because again, that's something that really pulls people towards urban environments. That's one of the main reasons why I will always want to live, near a city. Back when the world was open, if I wanted to go like, see some break dancers on a random Monday night, like I can do that, like, in Charlotte. I definitely could do that if I was living in Chicago. If the Alvin Ailey dance troupe was coming through somewhere, they probably ain't coming to Rock Hill, but they go come through Charlotte and Chicago. They go come through Atlanta. If Kendrick Lamar releases a new album and he goes on tour, he's coming to all the major cities. And again, there are some cities like, again, like, one of the beauties about, when I was growing up in the Chi, like, I mean, you had to come through there at some point. And your performance needed to be different. Like, you was gonna have to bring it, or you was gonna get booed off a stage, and you probably was gonna have to come out and do an encore. We talked about, again, the tech industry. That if you're into computer science and things like that, graphic design, San Francisco or the big cities is where it's at. So as a result, some of the more creative cities include San Francisco, Austin, Texas, huge music scene down there. And make note of this again. When you all are going to go into job markets, and you're going to have to, decide where you want to live and where you think the best opportunities may be for you in your career. So these are the kind of things that you want to consider as you go through these processes. The nightlife in these places is very attractive. Again, particularly for young people, these are the things that are very attractive. For college students like yourselves, for young working professionals, you work hard all week, Stephen. You're grinding it out. You want to live somewhere where you can enjoy yourself when you ain't working. Now, for people, my parents' age and stuff like that, that might not be as important of a consideration. But these are driving forces of many cities. Like, again, if you lived in a city, like, where if you've grown up in New York all your life, and New York literally pretty much never closes. And you move to a city and town and things are closed. I remember, like, I spent a couple of summers up in Minneapolis, and things is effectively shutting down 10, 11 o'clock at night. Like, I mean, it was blowing my damn mind. Like, what the hell is happening? So not only, like, the club being open late, are there plenty of places for you to go and sit down and eat afterwards? Some cities, that ain't the case. You might have like one or two spots. So there's a lot of business that can be done by catering to these needs, and cities, have been really wise to take advantage of a lot of this. And they do this because a lot of these cities, like St. Louis, for example, like Detroit, like Cleveland. So what was the driver of people coming to these cities in the first place? We've talked about this several times, but what was the main driver pulling people into it? Say it again.
Jobs.
Good.
Jobs.
Excellent. So in the early 1900s, and again, don't just look at the information here. Make sure that you understand the processes. I'm not going to test you on these numbers here, Deshaun, but I do want you to see the patterns of populations. That people was coming for jobs. You see, again, 1900, they got over 500,000 people there. It's the fourth largest city in America. By 1950, that population is really huge. All types of people that came. In just 30 years, that population began to drop rapidly. Why do y'all think that is? The jobs started to dry up. Again, people came for the Industrial Revolution, Deshaun. All those factory jobs and stuff like that. People sometimes coming just out of slavery, people coming from Italy, people coming from Germany. They don't have a lot of skill sets, but they can work with their hands very well. By the 1980s, Stephen, where those factory jobs starting to go?
Overseas.
Say it again, young man.
Overseas.
Absolutely. And that's how, again, we'll talk about later, those cities start to rise in population. So we talked about, again, that, more and more in recent times, the urban revolution is kind of going in like, Asia, Africa, places like that, Mexico. Because now people, those factory jobs that used to be in St. Louis and Detroit, they're setting up those factories overseas. And people are flooding those cities for jobs. Meanwhile, people are leaving cities like St. Louis, Detroit. Where are they going? So where they been going? They got to go somewhere. This is how we. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was about to say, you on my end, you was breaking up, so I didn't get to hear the question.
For sure. So like in we see again here, right, that the population began to fall off dramatically. And by 2003, just over 100 years later, it went from the 4th to the 53rd largest city. And then another problem with some of the cities is that we talked about the urban imagery in earlier chapters. Where again, we can see right now that Charles is in San Francisco because the Golden Gate Bridge is right behind him. But in many cases, Deshaun, it's becoming difficult for people to have these distinct places because so many different cities are designing themselves now where everything looks alike. You put up a Gap, you put up an Applebee's, you put up a Target, Chick-fil-A, movie theater over here. So you don't know if you're in Chicago, you in Philly, you New York, New Orleans, where are you? Everything's looking the same. And that is whack. So in many ways, these are some of the things we want to be and some of that needs to happen where when you go out of town, there's an expectation now where, okay, there's going to be a Target somewhere nearby. There's going to be a Chipotle somewhere nearby. If your city don't have those things, it's going to be kind of show. In some cities, for example, like through most of my adult life, this has changed now. Walmart could not build a store in Chicago city limits. The fear was they were going to take business away from a lot of local shops in Chicago, where, again, you have these mom and pop grocery stores. But if Walmart come into town, they're going to be able to undercut everybody. And a lot of those businesses that give the city its nature and character will kind of like, break down. Walmart eventually won that battle, and they were able to get into the cities. I want to start on city, families, and kinship real quick before we break for the day. Are there any questions on that chapter? And again, make sure that you make it to the library sometime this weekend.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Well, back then, on the views with women, not being able to work, do you believe that some people still carry that mindset to this day?
Absolutely, yes, definitely on both sides. There are absolutely a lot of men and women who believe that a woman's place should be at home. And we want to be clear, right? Like where if a woman wants to, because there's no harder job in the world than being a mother, in my opinion. If a woman wants to have the choice of doing that, there's nothing wrong with that. But we also want to look at the economics that if you was a poor Black woman in 1910, a lot of times you wouldn't have the option of doing that. A lot of times you would have to be working doing what? Taking care of white people's kids. So a lot of those women would have loved to have the luxury of being able to work at home. But I do think that, yes, well, in fact, I know that our economy still is very much structured in that way. Obviously, like we need female labor a lot more, so I don't think we're ever going to be able to go back to those times, Stephen. But the rate of pay between women and men suggests that we still have some of that going on. We talked about family and how that's viewed in the city and how it's contrasted and compared to single people and even like some of the individuals from the gay enclaves that we talked about. But we also want to look at how urban environments shape city families as well in different kinship patterns. We're going to get knocked out in a moment, so I won't go too deep into this. But we want to look at how we talked a great deal about segregation when we talked about ghettos and enclaves. And again, see how all this information ties together. But we also have seen a segregation of work and home through the industrial city. Keep in mind, right, that when people were doing agricultural work, home and work, it was all in one place. You go out, do your work in the field, come on back in, and once you were done for the day, and you would be able to spend a lot more time with your family. And just, have there wouldn't be this barrier between home and work. The industrial city separated that, where again, you would go work in this factory, travel oftentimes, several miles back to your home. This created a segregation itself amongst the workers many times, and many of these neighborhoods would be segregated by both race, but also social class and ethnicity. We also would segregate people based upon gender-based activities in the way that we talked about in the last chapter. So what we're looking at in this chapter is how kin and family relations have been impacted by urbanization, where again, a lot of times is viewed as families break down in urban environments. Is viewed that in small towns, you have old school, wholesome family values. But in a place like, LA, you ain't gonna have that as much. In a small town, you're gonna have, everybody come together for family dinner. Families in big cities may live differently. That's often the image. That's not always the reality, but that is often the image. So it's viewed as family not being as valued in these industrial times. I should say industrial times, I apologize. Today, there's very little time for families according to this view. It has created a bit of an emotional coldness between husband and wife. So we'll leave with these questions for today. We'll leave today with these questions as we begin to discuss the urban family on Monday. Why did this transformation take place? Why did personal life move towards privatization and domesticity? Why did the family develop an ideology that saw it as a center for emotional support and gratification? And how successful has the family been in becoming a private institution? Read up on this chapter over the weekend. Give these questions some critical thought. And I hope that you'll have something to say about these questions and give me some coherent answers to these questions when we start our class on Monday. As always, today's lecture is being recorded and will be posted on our class page shortly. You all have
Muhammad,
Yes, sir.
can I holler at you for like 2 minutes when everybody hang up?
Of course you can. So if anybody else has, unless anybody else have any questions, you all have a wonderful weekend. Make note that your second writing assignment is coming due on April 7th. So get started on that. It's already posted for you on e-learning. And of course, we got one more pop quiz coming up. That could be anytime. It could be on Monday. It could be, 2 weeks from now. Stay ready. Yes, sir.
Dr. Muhammad, I started on my paper. So
Okay.
you and one of the questions you have explained in detail the ways that white, Black, and Latino families have been impacted by the migration to the north to the suburbs. In the chapter, I went to a library and I had got copied the chapters and stuff. But the only real paragraph in that thing is the one at White Enclaves where they talk about the population change and stuff about that. And is that one of those cases where you want us to go off the dome from the knowledge that we gain from reading the whole chapter? Is it like something specific or something that